All right, we are live. Welcome, everyone. I'm excited for you all to be joining us as we wait for more people to kind of roll in and get settled. I'd love for you to kind of post in the comments where you're joining us from and what the weather is like. I'm coming from Victoria, BC, Canada. It's a little cloudy. It's unfortunate because yesterday was a lovely sunny day, and probably we'll get some rain, but otherwise it's not too bad. And Stephen, I think you were talking about it.
Yeah, we got a lot of rain, but see, I like the rain because I was born and raised in Vegas, and that's a desert. And then Utah's kind of a desert too, at least where I'm located. And so we love the moisture because when we don't have moisture, there's droughts and all that fun stuff. So I actually like it.
Yeah.
Cloudy actually is for me is like, yay.
Yeah. When living on the West Coast, you get a lot of the cloud. So
Yep.
when it's sunny, it's like, yes, especially in the wintertime.
That's true, huh? Because you guys are right on the coast there. So that's cool.
Yep. All right. Well, we got Seattle, grayish. Oh yeah, just up from you, Darcy. I got a direct ferry over to Seattle if I ever want to go. So.
Hey, those ferries are fun. I went on that once. I was there last summer with my family. That was a lot of fun. Unfortunately my daughter got a little seasick, which I was surprised about because I was like, this is such a short trip.
Yeah.
But,
It can happen. It can happen because it's a smaller ferry. You get a little bit more of the motion going on.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's kind of get rolling because I know we got a lot to cover. Steve, I know you've got a lot that you're going to be going through and showing us. So we want to be able to save some time for questions and answer those throughout the presentation or answer them at the end. So if you have any questions throughout the presentation, just drop them in the chat and I'll bring them up on the screen and we'll answer them live for everyone who's here. But first, welcome to our webinar. You've been ghosted. 3 steps to becoming an HR Ghostbuster. If you're looking for live captions, they should be auto-generated on, I believe it's YouTube or LinkedIn. And on YouTube, you do have to go into your settings and turn them on. So if you're looking for those live captions, you will have to go into your individual settings and turn them on. We can't generate them from our end, but both if you're on LinkedIn, it should show up automatically. And on YouTube, you're going to have to turn them on yourself. But it's pretty easy. Just go into your settings session. All right. And kind of without further ado, welcome again. We'll do quick introductions. Myself, if you've been to our webinars, you know who I am. My name is Noah Warder. I'm the head of people over here at Gusto. I love talking to people like Stephen about all things HR and people related and how to kind of make the best culture, how to create amazing people practices, experiences, engagement, retention, all that great stuff. And so today, Steve's going to take us through how to really reduce candidate ghosting, becoming that HR Ghostbuster, because it's so important. You put a lot of time and effort into these job postings, talking to these candidates. You don't want them to just ghost you. And so how do you create a great experience so that doesn't happen? And so I'm going to kind of pass things over to Steven to do a little introduction and take us through his presentation and answer any questions that any of you have out there in the internet world. So let us know, and I'll pass things over to Stephen now. Thanks again.
Cool. Hello, everyone. My name is Steve Smith. I'm actually the chief hiring expert here at Applicant Pro, and we'll do a brief introduction on who I am, just so you know a little bit about what I've been doing. So a lot of people just call it recruiting or talent acquisition. I call it recruitment marketing. And so I've been in recruitment marketing for the past 18 years. I am CP and PHR certified. So for those of you in the States that are familiar with the Society for Human Resource Management, I do have certifications there. I am the state director for Utah SHRM. I manage pretty much a little over 2,800 volunteers throughout the state. I am the author of the hiring tree. And in fact, the principles that we're going to talk about today on this particular presentation actually stem from chapter 13 of the book. And so a lot of the principles that we talk about actually are just from that particular chapter. And then finally, I did help start Applicant Pro, which is the current organization that I work for, in 2008. We have been on the Fortune 5000 list now for 10 years in a row. And I will tell you right now, there are very, very few organizations that have done that, less than 1%. I actually called Inc. 5000 to verify that because I was just interested, like, do people do this? Is this a normal thing? And less than 1% since their inception has actually had that type of feat. So it's kind of fun to talk about that. With my organization, I really care about hiring. this is my passion. This is what I love. We have about 11,000 clients. And so because we support those clients, we're constantly trying to educate and help them understand how to mitigate some of the issues and challenges that we face in the world of hiring. We have just under 300 employees. And the other fun fact is 83% of our employees are female. Most of which are moms that returned to the workforce. More than half have been returning to the workforce. And so we just love celebrating and helping those types of individuals in what we do. So that's a little bit about us at Applicant Pro, a little bit about me, but let's get into what we're here for. So I have a friend who works for the Gallup organization. They do a lot of polling and things like that. And there was a Forbes article, and he was so excited because he's like, "Hey, look, I'm in the Forbes article and magazine." And he sent it over to me, and I was reading the article, and this was the area that really stood out to me the most. That a lot of employers the last couple of years have been forced to make long overdue changes to their hiring and retention strategies. And they talk briefly about it. You can see the little by embracing remote work diversity, but it's so generalized that it was hard to really know, well, what are those long overdue changes? And so that's part of the reason why I wrote a book, and I talk about ghosting a book and quiet quitting and the great resignation and some of the things we've been facing. But first, what we want to do is we want to define ghosting, because basically what Noah said is most of us, when we think of ghosting at the interview stage. And the reality is there are 2 additional stages of ghosting that you may not be aware of that is actually happening to you. And so we want to define ghosting. And so as we go through this presentation, we're going to find all 3 of those areas, because ghosting is more than just me trying to get a hold of an applicant and suddenly they disapparate. And in fact, it was funny when I was researching my book. Did you know that the word disapparate is not a real word? J.K. Rowling actually made up that word for the Harry Potter series. And yet we all know what it means, right? They disapparate, right? They just completely disappear. For whatever reason, we can't get a hold of them anymore. But that's basically what ghosting is they just disapparate. They don't call back. They don't text back. They don't message or email or anything like that. They just literally fall off the face of the planet. And we just are struggling to try to get a hold of them. But the other thing is, I mean, have any of you ever experienced this? Have you experienced ghosting? Has this happened to you? And not just in the interview process. Do you have employees that suddenly ghost and don't show up for work? Because that's also a 4th element of ghosting that occurs. And so these are important aspects and things to think about. And here's what happens, right? When we're ghosted, this is the conundrum that we face. We can't fill our open positions. And I've been a recruiter before. Like I said, I was a recruiter prior to working here at Applicant Pro. And I'll tell you what, it was extremely frustrating because I had to start over most of the time. You know, I have somebody kind of in the loop and I get them to a certain stage in the process and all of a sudden they disappear and I literally have to start from scratch, which is really frustrating. It hurts the bottom line. It really helped. I mean, I don't know about you, but I was really just defeated, almost discouraged about it. It's like, oh my gosh, here we go. We have to start over again. There's a lot of pressure. I don't know if I reported to the CEO back then, and as well as our CFO, which was or not the CFO, the CMO, the marketing director. And I'll tell you what, that is a hard conversation to have when you go into those meetings and you're talking literally with the executive team, because you know the business is already hurting. And then there's this pressure that you need to deliver, and yet you're struggling with that delivery. Well, let's talk about this because sometimes what we don't realize is that part of the problem is us, not the applicants. Okay. So here's this have you ever question. And I just want you to rhetorically think about this. If you want to make comments, please do. But think about, have you personally ever ghosted an applicant? When you think about it from that perspective, either as a hiring manager, as a business operator, whatever, have you ghosted an applicant before? And you know what's interesting? When I do these presentations across the country, and it's about average, about the same. 85% of employers will say that they have absolutely never ghosted an applicant in their entire career. And I will tell you that they're lying. And here's why. Because one of the unique perspectives that I have in working in Applicant Pro is, as an organization, we actually deal with 2.5 million applicants a month. And so not only do I have the perspective from the employers, but I also have the perspective from the applicants. And the number one reason an applicant says that an employer ghosts them is after they submit an application, they expect some type of communication back, even if it's a rejection letter. So if you have a ton of applicants that you've had before where you never sent a rejection notice or some type of notification that said, hey, thanks for applying, but we're just not interested at this time, then guess what? You are guilty of ghosting. And so all of you should be raising your hands and saying, yep, I've definitely ghosted an applicant before, because the reality is I have yet to meet somebody who has never ghosted an applicant. All of us have done it at some point in our career. So the reason I bring that piece up is because oftentimes when I'm consulting with organizations, we play this blame game. Whose fault is it? And you know, the most common thing that I hear is, oh, it's this new generation, they're entitled and they're coming in and they just feel like they own the world, and so they don't, you know, and they're lazy, or like just all these things. Have you ever heard that before? Like, have you ever heard people say that about this generation coming up? And it's a little frustrating to me, because the reality is this generation coming up into the workforce is actually pretty phenomenal. Their efficiency levels are way higher than I ever dreamed of becoming. And not only that, when you look at data, so you know, I work with Gallup quite a bit, and I talk with them about a lot of the data that they run. And did you know that people in the 1970s said the same thing about the generation that was coming out at that time? What's interesting is this is not a generational gap. It's actually an age gap. Because think about it. When you were in your 20s, didn't you act the same way? Most of the time, yes, you did. So whose fault is it really? And the reality here is we have to think about, if there's something that we can do as an organization internally to change some of our processes to try to mitigate ghosting, wouldn't you want to do that? Wouldn't you want to know what those are and how to accommodate for that? Absolutely. And so we're going to talk about those three things today. So one of the first things you have to understand is you have to understand what we call a job seeker persona in the marketing world, which is really just perspective. What is the perspective of the applicant market today? What are job seekers actually looking for? What is the general situation that they're in? Oftentimes when I'm working with employers, if you actually look at this internally, and you think about, well, people that we have in the position already, what were you facing when you were actually looking for work, and get some of that feedback? Well, here are some of the top things that we're noticing. And I have less available at the bottom, but I want to bring that to the top for just a second. There is no doubt that in today's market, there are less candidates available. And in fact, there are 2 times less candidates than there were pre-COVID. And so you have to recognize that. That is a real statistic, at least in the United States, right? Because these are from the Bureau of Labor Statistics that I look at from an applicant perspective. And so when you look at that gap has actually doubled since pre-COVID. And so what you're feeling there is actually real. There actually are less applicants, but that doesn't mean you can't attract them and you can't kind of bring them over to your side, right? And so you need to understand what they're going through. Most of them are employed right now. Unemployment rates are at an all-time low across the country and in other countries, because I've looked at other countries and their unemployment is very similar. There's a lot of chaos and uncertainty still, which causes an element of hesitancy for job seekers. So sometimes the job seekers are like, I might put my hat in the ring for this, but I'm not quite sure. And so your ability to convince and your ability to kind of sell the idea has become that much more important during that interview process. But one of the things that I notice a lot of employers don't focus on is, what do the applicants want? And what is it that they're trying to escape? Because think about it. When you're a job seeker and you're looking for work, why are you looking for work? And this is where sometimes we forget. We forget why the job search occurs in the first place. And when you don't understand what the applicant is actually trying to escape from in coming to your organization, or you don't really understand what it is they want by coming to your organization, then you kind of lose out a little bit, and it can increase the likelihood of ghosting. And so one of the first things you have to do as an organization is sit down and think about, well, who is my target audience, my target job seeker? What are the kinds of individuals that I actually want to bring into this organization? And what is it that they could potentially be facing right now? And what are some of the questions that we want to answer that they're going to have during their journey, right? As they're going, I call it the applicant journey, the job seeker journey. It is a journey for them. They're going through this process of applying, which can sometimes be frustrating, because some applicants are frustrated right now because a lot of employers are just kind of holding off, because we see some layoffs on the loom and things like that. And so it's frustrating on both sides right now. So it's almost like this tug of war. So how do you help understand this? So we're going to talk about 3 areas where ghosting occurs the most. The first 2, most companies don't even realize they're getting ghosted, and yet it's happening all the time. And that first one is the application process. You have to think about, what is it like to apply with your organization? Okay. And there are 3 parts of your application process that absolutely have to be in place. If these things are not in place, applicants are ghosting you before you even get a chance to see their resume because you'll never see it. Right. So the first thing is mobile friendliness. Mobile technology introduced itself about 5 or 6 years ago in the applicant tracking world. In fact, back then, if you tried to apply from a mobile device, it was very clunky and very frustrating for a lot of applicants. But I will tell you right now, 83% of the people that are visiting our client sites online out of 11,000 clients, 83% of those 2.5 million applicants every month are on mobile devices when they're doing their searches. And in some industries, it's as high as 92%, like construction or manufacturing, retail. Like over 90% of those applicants are on mobile devices when they're actually doing their job search, in part because some of those types of individuals, they don't even have computer access at home. Their only computer access or internet access is actually on their phone. And so that's just kind of the nature of it. So when you look at your actual application process, if your process today is not mobile friendly, you're losing out on 83% of your applicants out there because they're not going to take the time to actually send you their information if your process doesn't meet that criteria. So just think about how your process works today. The second element of your application process is the time it takes to fill out the application. So our average client, it takes about 3.5 to 4 minutes for an applicant to apply. And what we have found is that for every additional minute beyond 4 minutes, you will lose 50% of your applicants. So the longer it takes for an applicant to actually submit an application, they just start dropping off. And that's important to understand because if your application process today is longer than that 3.5 to 4 minutes initially when they first apply, you're losing a ton of applicants without even realizing it. You are getting ghosted all over the place. And so what a lot of our clients, we actually introduced this concept 9 years ago. We were one of the first applicant tracking systems to ever do this. And it's this concept of a 2-stage apply, where you collect basic information up front and then you allow the applicant, the only certain applicants later on, to actually fill out the rest of the application when needed. Okay. So in fact, a lot of applicants treat applications like dating today. Think about dating apps. Dating apps function 2 ways. You either swipe left or you swipe right. Swipe left obviously means I'm not interested. Swiping right says, hey, I think there's a match. And so if you swipe right too and there's a match, we get connected and we can have the phone screen, right? If we think about it from a job perspective. And that's what applicants are familiar with, and that's what they're used to, and that's what they want today. They don't want to fill out some 15-minute application in hopes of an interview. They want to be able to just simply swipe right, and maybe they're answering a few job screening questions, which is where some of the bulk takes place. So for those of you that have like an applicant tracking software or some type of system where applicants apply, you have to make sure that that process is short and condensed and is basic up front, but also make sure that it still accommodates for job screening questions so that you as an employer don't miss out on screening out the riffraff. Because let's be honest, there's still people that apply that you don't want to see. But I'm telling you that time frame that it takes them in that initial application. Now, if they need to spend 10 minutes down the road filling out the rest of the application as part of this, second stage, that's okay. Most applicants are willing to do that because now they've gotten to that point in the interview process. But I'll tell you right now, if you have an application process that is very heavy up front, you not only are you losing applicants, but for those that actually do finish, guess what they're going to remember? They're going to remember how frustrated they were filling out that long application, which actually heightens the ghosting issue. Because if they have other companies that they're meeting with and the application was a breeze when they first applied, guess what they're going to think about? Oh, it was way easier over here. They're way more efficient. Therefore, they must be better. Maybe I should go with this company instead, and you lose them. So this is really important aspect. Now, the last thing here, you see this little arrow it stands for the redirect. So most job boards like Indeed, ZipRecruiter, Glassdoor, LinkedIn, like a lot of the major job boards, they have this option called Easy Apply or Quick Apply. And this was introduced mostly with mobile technology and is fully in line with 2-stage applications. Because what the Easy Apply allows an applicant to do is to click the button, it inhales their profile, and then they can just send their profile off to the employer. And they're done. That's the application process. Maybe they'll answer a few job screening questions and that's it. And so they never, for example, if I'm on Indeed and I find your job, I never leave the Indeed website. However, today, a lot of applicant tracking systems and other online options they function via redirect, where when I click to apply, it redirects me to the ATS or it redirects me to the company page or wherever it is I need to go. And then I apply. Did you know? And Indeed says that you'll lose about 76% of your applicants in the redirect. Our statistics show it's actually a little over 80%. And here's why. Because when you redirect them, there's this concept called resume parsing. And so they're like, I get a lot of people say, well, Steve, wait a minute. They can just load their resume and it parses it in. But see, resume parsing is quickly being replaced by profile parsing, because resume parsing is it's only accurate about 80% of the time. So have you ever uploaded your resume and then all the information gets put in the wrong place, and then you literally have to sit there and spend more time fixing it than you do actually applying for the position? That's resume parsing. And so when it functions via redirect, and then I can upload my resume and it just parses it in there, there's a very good chance that the resume that I'm using may not be fully compatible. However, a profile is 100% parsable. Why? Because it's built that way. When an applicant tracking system builds an integration with a place like Indeed and ZipRecruiter, LinkedIn and such, it's 100% built the way it's supposed to function. So when I click to use my profile to parse instead of my resume, like loading my resume, it's 100% accurate. I don't have to fix anything. And it's just a beautiful part of the application process. So that's the third element. So when you look at your application process, if your function right now is a redirect, where people get redirected to your page, sometimes they have to start their search over again and things like that, you are losing 70 to 80% of your applicants right off the bat there. So look at all of these three areas. I just talked about three key areas in your application process where you are getting ghosted already without even realizing it. So do you want to increase applicant flow? Look at your application process. That is a huge factor right now and something that a lot of employers don't think about.
So before we jump in,
let's talk about this.
One question here coming from Darcy is, how do cover letters play into this process?
Such a great question.
What do we do? Because a lot of companies still ask for cover letters.
Yeah. So the question is, do you need a cover letter in your initial stage? If you think about dating, right, in the dating app, a cover letter is kind of like, hey, I need to know your entire history. So I need to know about the divorce and the kids and all that stuff right up front. So you have to think about your organization as a whole and think about how important is a cover letter to me. Now, for our system, we allow an applicant to upload a resume and a cover letter and a whole bunch of documents all at once. Some systems don't allow that. And so you have to think about, well, my current process and system, should I force a cover letter, or should I even allow a cover letter, or should it be something that I capture after the fact? A lot of my clients will capture it at the second stage. And the reason they do that is because I need to know first, are you qualified for this position? Do you meet some of the basic criteria that I'm looking for? Let me take a look at your resume and see if something kind of stands out to me that would actually be helpful to me. And then if it makes sense, okay, let me get a cover letter from you. Some people just make the cover letter part of the resume. And so you just have to be very transparent and clear in your application process to say, look, I need a cover letter, because if you absolutely need a cover letter, then let them know up front so that the candidate is aware of it. I will say, though, that cover letters do not help with the redirect process, like the quick apply and easy applies, because most job boards today that use the quick and easy apply options only allow the inhaling of an actual resume. So unless the applicant has included a cover letter as part of that resume, it doesn't get pulled over automatically. And so sometimes that becomes a choke point. So that's really the answer. You have to really think about, how critical is a cover letter for me as an organization? And am I okay collecting it a little bit later in the process or not? Does that make sense? So
great. Thanks. I think that's awesome. And Darcy, let us know in the comments if that kind of answers your question. We do have one more, and I think this is coming from the candidate perspective of like, are you sure that your CV or your resume is actually 100% accurate or being inhaled accurately into those applicant tracking systems?
Such a good question. The answer to that question is you can never know, because it depends on the actual applicant tracking system that is taking your resume. It depends on how they've built it. But I will tell you, there is no system in this entire world that is 100% accurate when it comes to resume parsing. It doesn't exist out there. It just doesn't. And so how do you check if your CV? There's a few ways you can check. One is you can make sure that your resume itself is not in compatibility mode. A lot of candidates don't realize that. And because it's in compatibility mode, there are elements of it that are not parsable. Another way to check is to make sure that when you create your resume, so for example, some people will scan it into a PDF file, and then they make the PDF file like read only, or they do certain things to the PDF that now makes it that it doesn't work. It's not parsable. And especially if you're scanning. So if I'm just scanning something on my printer, right? I scan it and then make it into a PDF, and then I'm using my PDF to apply. Most scanned PDFs are not parsable at all. So those are 0% accuracy because there's nothing that will be parsed, right? So as an applicant, especially as a job seeker, as you're creating your resume, it is highly beneficial to just make sure that your resume is as parsable as possible, which means you don't want it in the compatibility mode and things like that. You also want to make sure that you're not fancy, right? Sometimes applicants like to get really fancy on their resume and create all these extra columns and sections and pieces of the those things are usually not parsable either. They'll add a picture. They just put stuff on their resume that doesn't help. And so from a Canadian perspective, I've seen that a lot with some of our foreign applicants that apply, because we do have foreign clients. And I'll tell you what, oftentimes they're even less parsable than the US ones, because they just add a whole bunch of little frilly boxes and other parts to their resume. You really want your resume to be simplistic. That is the best way. And when you go to, I don't know, you could go to different ATSs and just load your resume and see what happens. You can also test it that way. But those are some definitely things to think about to make sure it's 100% accurate. And I will tell you, a CV and a resume will never get to 100% accuracy. It just won't. It's impossible. The highest I've ever seen is around 80%. It'll just never get that way. That's why profile parsing is quickly replacing resume parsing, which is why the quick apply, easy apply, and those types of functionalities on most job boards today, that's why they use them, because they want 100% accuracy, because they hear what candidates say.
That's awesome. So
great
part of that is also, so make sure your resume is parsable, but also make sure your LinkedIn profile and your Indeed profile are also up to date and looking really good.
Absolutely. Because oftentimes if you're doing job searches on those boards anyway, most ATSs, at least we hope most ATSs, have that built integration in place, and it should pull it accurately. But you'd be surprised. There's over 1,000 ATSs, at least in the United States, and only about 30 to 40% of them actually have this full integration built. So it's not very high by comparison. So that's why you got to look at your process, guys. I can't tell you how important this area is, where you are getting ghosted and you don't even know it.
Got to think of it like a sales and marketing funnel. The easier you make it for people to engage and connect with you, the better it is.
Absolutely.
We got another question here from about like, if you make it really easy, these unserious applications increase. Like, are you dealing with quantity versus quality of applicants?
That's such a great question. So here's the thing. You will see an increase of applications, but your applicant tracking system should be able to also include your job screening questions. The key here are your job screening questions. Are you using your job screening questions effectively to be able to filter out the riffraff? Okay. And the way our system is built and the way the good ATSs are built to function for easy apply integrations is they can still force the job screening questions. And our job screening questions do two things. It automatically disqualifies people for certain criteria, but then it also automatically scores people based on preferences. Because how many of your managers out there ask for preferences? Oh, well, I prefer 5 years, but I'm still willing to look at somebody with like 3 or 2 years. Okay, well, that's what scoring is for. And so your job questions should allow two things: an automatic filter and an automatic scoring, so that scoring will score people that rank better based on their level of qualifications, so that when managers start that review process, they can weed out the ones right off the bat, but then they still have a list of applicants who are qualified, but then they can rank those qualifications a lot easier. So that's the key, because you're right. You will see an increase of applications when you make some of these changes, but you're also going to get a lot of people that aren't qualified. And so that's why those job questions are so critical. And most of your job boards like Indeed and ZipRecruiter and Glassdoor and LinkedIn, they will allow for job screening questions as part of this integration process. And so if your current ATS or system does not allow for those integrations, that's a problem. And that's something you want to address as an organization. So that's a great question.
Awesome. Thanks, Nick. Thanks, everybody, for your questions.
Cool.
Let's keep rolling.
All right. So let's go to this next slide. So this is the second area where you see ghosting the most. How many of you use a job description as your job ad today? And then, it's funny because in the job description world, we throw our job description up there. It's just a bunch of bullet points and legal jargon as to what our position entails. And then we do what this guy does in the office. We kneel down and we pray to the gods that somebody will apply to it. We call it the post and pray method. It is not the most effective method. And the reality is a job description is not the most effective way to sell the idea of why they should work for you, or in other words, swipe right. Think about that for a moment. If you used a job description idea in dating, how many swipe rights do you think you would actually get? You wouldn't get a whole lot. And what's interesting too is we use a lot of acronyms in our job ads too, like DOE. DOE is pretty common out here. It stands for depends on experience. But did you know, and I can't believe this statistic is real. I just can't. But we interviewed a whole bunch of people that were 24 years and less. And we asked them what they thought DOE meant on a job application. And you know what? Most 29%, this is way too high. Almost 29% said, oh, it means dough. It means we're going to make some dough. So we're going to make money. And that's what they think DOE stands for. Now, 29% is not a lot, but you know what? That's enough that tells me I probably should not use DOE on my job descriptions and ads anymore. So that's the mistake, is stop using job descriptions and start using a job ad. The whole purpose of a job ad is kind of like a cover letter, right? We want to sell the idea of why you should come work for us as an organization. And I will tell you, when an applicant is going through the application process, and they're applying for the first time, the job ad is one of the first impressions they will have of your organization. So what kind of first impression do you want to leave? The second impression is when they're actually applying, which we already talked about, right? But this first impression is this job ad. Now think about it. If I'm a job seeker, and we talked about the persona earlier, if I don't know what you're looking for, then I'm not addressing the questions that you have in your job search. Does that make sense? Our job ad should address the questions that an applicant will have during their job search, because then they're less likely to ghost you. Why? Because there's this feeling of excitement. They go and they apply and they're like, oh my gosh, I hope that one calls me. I hope they call me for an interview. That's the kind of feelings they should have when they read your job ad. And yet most of the time, at least 88% of the time, because I researched this all over the country, I ask people all the time, what do you guys use? Between 85 and 88% of employers today will use a job description or some form of job description as their job ad. And you are killing yourselves because you're not addressing what the applicant wants to know. So here's the things. This is what should be in your job ad. Work schedule. It is the number one thing applicants want to know right now, believe it or not. Because when I ask most people, they say, oh no, the number one thing people want to know is the pay. It's not true. The number one thing applicants want to know right now is they want to know, what is the schedule? Why? Because think about it. You are competing with their children, with their family, with their extracurricular activities, with their hobbies. That's what you're competing against. So if that's what we're competing against, then I need to be fully transparent about my schedule up front so that they know that here's what the expectation is. It's not enough to just simply say full-time, part-time. We need to be transparent about what full-time and part-time actually looks like. Okay, does that make sense? Pay structure obviously is still important. In fact, did you know that a lot of the major boards, like in Indeed and LinkedIn especially, that if you do not include pay, that their algorithm will derank your position? So you will be deranked and you will get less visibility and less searchability. And what they've kind of done to help mitigate this a little bit is Indeed and LinkedIn are the first two job boards out there that will actually guess. They will put a guess in it based on your job title and other factors. They will say, well, it looks like this probably pays such and such. So how many applicants do you think are applying for your position and think you pay one thing and you actually pay another? The reason they probably think you pay something that you don't pay is because of the guesstimations that are being placed on a lot of the major job boards today. It is a major factor. And so it is in your best interest to be fully transparent about your pay. Why? Because most of the job boards are either going to filter you out, derank you significantly, and in some states now, at least in the US, they will actually block your ad if you don't have list pay, because it's now a requirement by law. And there are 5 or 6 states that have already passed it into law, and there are 17 additional states that are looking at passing a similar law. Guys, it's coming. It's already coming, which is why Indeed and LinkedIn chose to change their algorithm last year around July to October timeframe. And that's when they decided to change these algorithms to accommodate for some of these changes that are coming. And it's interesting that even though only a few states, at least on the US side of things, are making these changes, the job boards just decided, you know what, we're just going to force it on everybody, because for them, it's a quality control factor. The fact that when you include pay, that's a quality thing to them. And so they want better quality ads on their job board so they can attract job seekers. Because I'll tell you right now, the job board's number one person is not the employer. The job board's focus is on the candidates, because if they don't have candidates conducting searches, they have nothing to offer you as an employer. And so that's their focal point. So just understand that, because that it's important to know why these job boards function the way they do and why that focus is there. The last thing on this I'll talk about is requirements and preferences. Oftentimes in our job ads, we have this section on here's all the requirements and then here's some of our preferences, right? Did you know that preferences are actually scaring applicants away 3-1? Because applicants that are not willing to take a risk, they'll look at the preferences and they'll say, oh man, I don't have that preference. I guess I won't apply at all. They're just not willing to take the risk. And what's really interesting about some of the stats that we've looked at, females are 3 times less likely to apply than males, because males are a little bit riskier and they'll just throw their hat in the ring and say, oh, well, we'll see if they call me. But females don't think that way. Oftentimes, three times out of 10, they will just say, well, you know what? I don't think I'm a good fit because they have this preference. And so maybe I shouldn't apply after all. And it turns out they were a solid fit for the organization. So in your job ads, you really have to think about requirements and preferences. And if I should just eliminate preferences altogether, the cool part about preferences is if you're using those job questions appropriately, you can still include preferences in your job questions without necessarily telling the applicant that this is my preference. Does that make sense? And that's one of the best ways to help mitigate this aspect of it, because you will scare applicants away with your preferences, even though it's just preferred, right? So you have to really differentiate what is truly required and then what is just a preference or that we're willing to train on or things like that. In fact, if you're going to include preferences, what we recommend is that you also talk about the fact that we're willing to train or help you get certified or what have you. So if there are some preferences that are pretty important and you're scared to take them off, then just think about how can I be a little bit more transparent about the preference so that I'm not scaring somebody away. Does that make sense? And so those are some elements of your actual job ad that are so critical as a part of this process so that you're not scaring people away. So before we go on to the next section and the last section, questions on that, if any?
we haven't got any questions about the job posting and the job advertisement. I do want to say one thing of what at Gusto, something that we've found a lot of success in is that we have completely removed all requirements and preferences from our job postings. And what we do instead is we set out expectations. So within your first 3 months, this is how you'll be onboarded. And within your first year, we assume you'll be able to achieve X, Y, Z. And so saying people what we think they're going to be able to achieve within the first year and how we'll support that has been a huge game changer for our applications and our candidates and how they're applying, and we get a lot of the qualitative data of just your job posting just stood out to me. It's so different than everyone else's. So I wanted to learn more. We made it curious. People were like, oh, this is interesting. I want to learn more about this.
Feeling of excitement. That's what you want. And that includes curiosity. Like, oh, wow, why did they say that? This is interesting. This is capturing my attention. And it's so funny because I speak to a lot of CEOs and things like that, executive people, when I do some of these executive panels. And it's interesting because they'll say, you know what, Steve, nobody reads the job description anyway. And you know what I tell them? I say, you're absolutely right. And that's because you're using job descriptions. So just stop. Just stop doing it. All right, so let's go on. The next thing you have to really think about is your belief system. As an organization, do you truly believe what you have to offer is to the benefit of the individual that's applying? And it amazes me how many hiring managers are not quite on par with this. It just boggles my mind. So we're going to talk about now the area where everybody thinks ghosting lies is the interview process. This is probably one of the most critical components of the ghosting. And the best way to mitigate it is to really think about what in the world is it like to interview with you? Are your managers actually vested in the process? And if we go back to this, do they actually believe that what they offer is superior to what the applicant is coming from, right? This is so important because sometimes we don't, and the cool part about this is trainable. And so sometimes we don't realize that, oh, I haven't even really addressed this with the manager yet. I haven't talked to them about how they need to believe this, right? That this is going to be superior to what they're doing. So one of the best ways that you can help mitigate ghosting in your interview process is to make sure that you encourage as part of it, but you want to make sure that your managers are vested in the process. Now, what does vesting mean? Let's talk about this. One of the biggest changes that we've seen that is actually helping a ton is separating recruiting from HR, but not like this. When you look at this picture and you think about the separation between these two, what thoughts come to your mind? They're wearing masks. They're completely faced away from each other. They're in their own world, their own books, their whatever, right? This is not what we mean by separating recruiting from HR. This is what it should look like. So when we say separate recruiting from HR, recruiting is really marketing. And I'm going to talk about this all the time. I talk about this in my book a ton. Recruiting has always been marketing. The whole purpose of the recruiter and the talent acquisition team is to help attract people to the organization and take them through this amazing interview process to help them say yes. Yes to the dress, if you will, right? And so that's the whole purpose of this process. But unfortunately, when some people think about separating it, this is what they think about. And this is not the way we want to separate. It has to look like this, where it's this cohesive work together, also with the hiring managers, because sometimes the recruiter and the hiring manager, this is what it looks like instead of this, right? Because that's where some of the biggest clashes that we see. And once organizations hit about 300 employees or more, we see this a lot where the recruiting is being separated from HR more and more, but it looks too much like this, guys. It needs to look like this. And so we're going to talk about how do you help it look like this? Let's talk about it. We have 3 areas where you can improve that. So the first one is looking at your recruiters and actual hiring managers that are in the process. There are 4 elements that need to exist. The first one is you cannot allow your recruiters and hiring managers to be buried in administrative tasks. This, I can't emphasize this enough, because the number one thing that applicants have complained about during the interview process is when they meet with the manager is distracted. How are they distracted? Well, they get dings from emails, from text messages. Sometimes people knock on the door and come into the office during the interview. There are so many distractions that the manager can't just sit there and focus on the candidate in the interview and give them their full undivided attention. It is by far one of the biggest complaints that candidates make today, is that the managers are buried in all these administrative tasks that they really can't sit there and focus on me as a candidate. Think about what that does to the applicant's psyche, right? If they go and meet with another organization where they just had a blast during the interview process and they were completely focused on, when they look at your process and that process, they're going to compare, guys. And guess what happens when they compare? You lose and you get ghosted. They will never show up again. They won't respond back to you because it was such a poor experience. And this is the number one area where that occurs, period. Now, the second thing is becoming brand champions. Your recruiting and hiring managers are your ambassadors for the organization. They are your brand champions. If they don't understand the branding, train them on it. Help them understand the organization as a whole. And another disconnect I see oftentimes is sometimes the recruiting and the hiring manager doesn't truly understand the impact that that position has on the organization as a whole. Think about that for just a moment. If I truly understood the impact that this position has on the organization as a whole, it is a lot easier for me to help convey that message during the interview process to my applicant, which can create this feeling of excitement, right? I mean, Noah just talked about this change that they made in their process, even with the ad itself. But I can guarantee you, Noah, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I bet you take that same part of your job, right? And you take that throughout the entire hiring process, and it has created a much better experience for the applicant and has made it much more successful in bringing them on, and they get excited and they're curious and all of those things. That's exactly what you want. If your brand champions are not instilling that in the applicants as they're going through this interview process, that's a challenge. That's a problem. And that will increase ghosting. And guess what, guys? This is all trainable. The cool part about all the things we're going to talk about in these next 3 slides is you can train your managers on this kind of stuff. This is not something that it's like aloof or it's just this cosmic thing that, oh, we have no idea. Most organizations have core values or mission statements or who you are as an organization. That is part of your brand. And that is what they are championing when they're taking people through the interview process. Now, the next thing is this Bob Ross, and this goes right along with what Noah said. For those of you who don't know, Bob Ross was a famous painter. And the reason he became famous is because he was the YouTuber of his day, right? He was the influencer of his day. And he could convince you in a 1-hour program that you could paint a happy little tree, that anybody could paint a happy little tree. It doesn't matter what skill level you're at. You can paint a happy little tree just by watching this 1-hour episode. And I would encourage you and maybe even challenge you to go find Bob Ross on YouTube one of these days and just watch 1-hour episode and see if you can't paint a happy little tree. There's a reason why classes exist today where you can go and paint like this landscape or scene for like an hour or two with your group of friends. Have you ever done that where you go and you paint this thing, this scene, right? Bob Ross is the reason that even exists. This is your opportunity during the interview process for your recruiting and hiring managers to Bob Ross it. Let us paint the happy little trees for you and help you understand what it's going to be like to actually work for our organization. But not just the organization. What does it look like to work in that department? And what does it actually look like to work in that position? That's what you're painting, the whole picture, not just a piece of the picture. And unfortunately, during the interview process, we focus so heavily on the big picture, like here's who we are as a company, that we forget that that's not why the applicant's there. The applicant really doesn't know your company yet. They're not quite on board with the company. But if they feel like they can get on board with the department and the department manager and the people that they'll be working with, oh, it's so much more powerful. And Noah, it sounds like as you guys have been taking people through the interview process, you're helping them paint those happy little trees along the way, right? It's exactly what's happening. This is so critical. And we have found that those organizations that do this effectively are succeeding, and they're not seeing any ghosting at all. In fact, some of you on this call today are probably, well, I'm not seeing any ghosting at all. It's probably because you're doing some of these things already. And so this is huge. The last thing is this influence and decision-making. It amazes me how many organizations have people that are doing the interviews but have no power. They have no ability to make a decision. There's really no influence. And guess what? During the interview process, candidates are going to ask questions. What if your manager doesn't know how to ask the question? That's important. So you need to anticipate up front. These are the common questions that applicants are going to ask during the interview process. Hey, manager, here's the answers to those questions. And you can also make it your own, but let me help you. Let me train you on some of the answers to those questions up front so that during the interview, you don't come across as, oh my gosh, I have no idea. I don't know. Oh, who knows, right? Because that will completely deflate the room. The candidate will feel like, oh my gosh, this person has no control whatsoever, no power or influence. Why am I even meeting with them, right? And so this is important to understand because candidates think about this kind of stuff. All right, so let's go to the second piece, ongoing communication. Clear expectations and internal accountability need to exist up front. One of the biggest clashes between recruiters and the hiring manager is the time. Because the recruiter has to sit there constantly saying, manager, did you make a decision yet? Did you make a decision yet? And on the back end, they're constantly having to communicate with the applicant. We're still waiting. We're still waiting. We're still waiting, right? So what we've noticed and what we've seen is for those organizations that create an internal accountability process during the actual interview are way more successful. What does that look like? Well, think about it. Right now, an applicant on the market is only on the market for about 18 days. That's the average right now. And in some industries, it's as low as 14 days. That means you have 14 to 18 days to get somebody into the process, interviewed, offer on the table, and starting the job. You have 18 days to do that, okay? Why are we not setting those clear expectations with our managers up front? Hey, manager, we have 18 days to get this process completed. So I'm going to give you the window right now. We have 18 days to do this. This is part of our internal accountability, which means I need times that we can conduct the interviews and go through this process. And then I need a decision within this time frame so that we can get people in the door within that 18-day window. This is called internal accountability. The problem is most of us don't hold our managers accountable to something like that. We just say, oh, you got a job open? Great. Let's post and pray, right? Which is what most of us are doing right now. Let's bring a few people in, throw them in front of you. Oh, you didn't like them? Okay, let me start over. It's just this, it's your spinning wheel. And that's it. That's all that's happening. And so if you can create this internal accountability process and let them know here is the window that we have to work in, you are going to be much more successful at not only bringing the applicants in, but getting to the decisions faster from your managers so that the process looks more like this and not this. Okay. So important. I cannot emphasize that internal accountability enough. It is so critical. Frequent communication is important. On average, you should be reaching out to the applicant every other day. So every 2 days. That is the most effective that we have seen. And it's the most effective I've seen in the last 18 years. Even if it's just simply to say, hey, just want to let you know, we love the interview. Always be positive. Hey, we loved what you talked about here and there. We're still making a decision right now. So we're just waiting for that to happen. But I just wanted to tell you that you're still in the loop. And so let me know if you have any questions, something like that. You just have to have this frequent communication. And when you know that somebody is not going to be moved forward with, let them know right away. Don't ignore them. Don't ghost them, right? Oftentimes we ghost candidates way too much in that area. Let them know it's okay to reject. We're going to talk about rejection on the third slide here in just a second. The last thing is the show and tell, which we've already talked about. This is part of Bob Rossing it. When you have the opportunity, if you can allow this applicant to speak to the manager that they're going to be reporting to and potentially speak with other coworkers that they might work with in that team, that is how you show and tell. Show them the organization. If you're remote, that's okay. Invite some of the people that they're going to be collaborating with on the call. There's nothing wrong with that. They don't have to be there for the whole interview, but just have them on the call, at least at some point in that stage, so that they have the opportunity to kind of ask those questions and show and tell. So much more effective when you do it that way. And this is part of that communication process. All right, last thing, individualize the experience, guys. All applicants are individual. We're all our own person, right? How many of you love going to like a group interview? And I'm not saying group interviews are bad. And in some industries, they're helpful, right? Because then you can kind of whittle it down. But at the end of the day, you have to remember that the experience is individualized. And if the way your process works does not allow for that individualization, you're going to struggle. Noah, did you have a question or something you wanted to bring up? Because I noticed you chimed on there.
Yeah, just Nick's got a quick question, but I think you might answer it a little bit in your upcoming points. And so if maybe we can add some more to it once you kind of get through these points. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah, we're going to talk about engaged conversation in just a second. But this right here is actually for more of after the interview. So this slide is more about how is your leadership involved in the decision-making process, but then also involved in the onboarding and the training and the ongoing conversations with the applicant. You need to reject quickly, guys, and reject. Be okay with rejecting. And the number one thing applicants want to know is they want to know feedback. Now, from a legal perspective, especially in the US, because we're so legal oriented sometimes, a lot of employers are scared to give feedback. And so they just want to say, you know what, we appreciate it. We moved on with somebody else and we move on, right? The problem is applicants, that's not very helpful to the applicant. And in fact, all this work you did up to this point to bring them through the process, and then you just say, we've chosen other applicants and that's it. Horrible. That's horrible feedback. So you can still talk to the actual interview. The manager felt like your demeanor was amazing. You're going to be an incredible person with wherever you go to work. We love this aspect about you. Your customer service skills are on par. We're excited about those skills that you have. Unfortunately, we've just decided not to move forward you at this time because we just had somebody better qualified, but we recognized and noticed these things about you in the interview. Keep that up. That was wonderful. We loved hearing that about you in the interview, and we wish you the best of luck in your endeavors, right? Whatever it might be. But you see how different that sounds from just, oh, we've selected another applicant, thanks. And you just move on. There are ways to talk about feedback without getting into the legal parameters, right? without getting into the Chicken Little syndrome where the sky is falling and, oh my gosh, I can't believe we just said that. So just think about that. Be more. And the cool part is AI technology is going to make this easier for you guys. I can't wait as AI technology begins to evolve. You can create rejection feedback based on the interviews using AI in seconds. It's amazing. I've seen it happen and it's so fun to do. And so there are ways to be rejecting, right, without sounding rejectful. Okay. Make it positive. Care and value. Obviously, you want to care and value them as they go through the process and point out, unique elements about them. And I will tell you, if you have 20 interviews in a day, you need to get feedback after every interview because the manager will mix them. They will mix them. I would mix them as a recruiter. I would mix people all the time. And I say, yeah, let's make an offer to that one. And they come in. I was like, well, that's not the one I thought we were going to make the offer to. What happened? Right? So make sure that you're getting that valuable feedback every day. You can still decompress at the end of the day and say, how was the whole day? But make sure that you're getting that specific feedback and leave room for it in the interview process to really allow the manager to gather their thoughts about that applicant so that you have that specific feedback so that you show that this care and value and who you are. I mean, how many of you ever done that where you make an offer to somebody, you're like, that was not the right candidate. Dang it. What did I just do? It has happened. I've seen it happen way too much. And it certainly isn't individualized in that way. So just kind of think about that. This individualization, did we answer that question, Noah?
Well, I'm just gonna bring it up. So Nick asked, so what would you say for companies that see the most ghosting during this time? They're saying that we communicate a lot. And there was an additional comment of they also have very clear onboarding expectations. So
yeah. So what are you communicating so much, right? That's what I would ask you. And we can obviously talk about this offline, Nick, if you want. But you have to think about, what are we communicating? Yes, we communicate so much, but what are we actually communicating? Because sometimes what you're communicating can lead to the ghosting as well, right? And sometimes employers are scared to ask this. I don't know why, but when you're in the process with applicants, why not ask them, what are you guys competing against right now? What are some of your other options right now? What is it you like about those other options? Because you might find in that discovery and asking those questions that, oh, well, we do that too. Let me tell you a little bit more about that. Does that make sense? And so sometimes during this interview process, we have to be more willing to ask the questions and more willing to dig a little bit. And this is what makes it individualized, right? And sometimes we have this list of surface level questions and we just kind of stop there and we're not digging enough. And so helping to train your managers on what it looks like to actually dig a little bit deeper is huge. Oh, so you see it during the onboarding. Same idea. What does your onboarding process look like? Is it electronic or is it all paperwork where they have to sit in an 8-hour class and fill out all this stuff all day long? Because that's another element. Because as soon as an applicant has to start doing a ton of stuff on the paperwork during the onboarding process, guess what? They think, oh my gosh, should I have even done this? What was I thinking? They start getting these doubts. In the buying world, we call it buyer's remorse. So this is candidate's remorse, right? They're like, oh my gosh, I accepted this offer, and sure enough, this process I wasn't solid on it yet, and now I got to this point, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I just can't handle this, and so then they just disappear. Sometimes they'll disappear right at lunch, right?
I think the other thing is also looking at how personalized your onboarding approach is, and
That's
how when does it start? Mm-hmm. Is it starting with just here's a bunch of forms that you need to fill out, or is it here? Like hiring manager, have you spoken to the new person before they started?
Yeah.
Are you building in those touch points? Have you signed a buddy program? Are they looking at that thing as a whole of like, is this a human experience or is this a very corporate experience?
Yeah. Is it just paperwork? Right. And it needs to be human. It really does. In fact, here's a quote from me. So this is my quote about millennials, because a lot of people make comments about millennials, but the reality is we all want this. We want to be in the loop about our day-to-day work. We want to know and understand the impact that our role actually has on the organization. The onboarding process is one of the best places that you can start talking about that. Now that you're here, we're excited. Now that you're here, let's talk about, yeah, you got this paperwork. That's fine. We're going to talk. But while we're doing this paperwork, let's talk about what your purpose is. Let's talk about where we're headed as an organization and how excited we are that you're going to help us get there. Give them the big picture, especially millennials. Millennials want to hear this, and they want to hear it often. It's not enough to just talk about it on onboarding, and then 6 months later in our 6-month review, we bring it up again. This is something they want to constantly know about. And as long as you're doing that consistently with your employees, you're going to find a lot more success and avoid people dropping off at the onboarding stage as well as the other stage. So we don't really have time to talk about the engaging because I know we're at time. We've got like 2 minutes left. But here's the biggest thing I can tell you on this. And you can look at this traditional focus versus the engaged focus. It's not enough to just tell your managers, hey, you need to be more engaging. That's not what it's about, right? You need to teach them to be engaging, right? And the way you teach them to be engaging is to help them understand the differences between what we typically call the traditional focus and what an engaged focus actually looks like. It's not about the paycheck, but what's the purpose? Why do I work for my paycheck? My family, my school, my whatever, right? My activities. Are we just a boss, or are we actually a coach? Think about what a coach does for you compared to a boss. A coach is designed to make you better over time. It's this ongoing conversation. We focus on your strengths and using those strengths to overcome the weaknesses. Just things like that. So I think this slide is self-explanatory, so I'm not going to explain it in too much detail, but just make sure that when you're thinking about the process, are you engaging? So for that question about the onboarding, is your onboarding an engaging process that focuses on these things, or are you just doing the traditional like you've always done with onboarding? So we have some free tools on Applicant Pro. If you go to applicantpro.com/tools, we have some really cool guides there and things like that. They're free. You can download them and use them in your processes. And then finally, if you want to talk to me, because maybe you're like, Steve, I need more than this. I need to understand what you're doing, what others are doing. You can scan that QR code. It is my calendar link. You are welcome to schedule a ghost busting review with me. I may look at your process and throw you under the bus a lot, but it is for your own good. I promise it will be coach oriented and not boss oriented. But yeah, if you have any additional questions, we can obviously take more questions now, but you're welcome to reach out to me and we can go from there. So Noah, I'm going to turn it back over to you for any additional questions, and then yeah, we'll be done. So
I think, yeah, we got one more question I think we can answer really quickly coming in from Sarah. So in a process with multiple stages for candidates who make it far, but not to the final round, do you think it is still best to call applicants to reject?
Why would you not call them? Why would you not call them? Sarah, I know that this is a hard situation, especially when you're the one having to do the phone call, right? Because more than likely, the reason you're asking this question is because you're the one expected to make the phone call. But again, in those rejections, think about what happened during that interview process and make it positive rejection, which I know is sometimes an oxymoron. But when you can talk to the fact that, you know what, during the process, these were some things that we loved about you. Unfortunately, we had an applicant that just had a little bit better skills in this area, had a little bit more experience in this area. And so because of that, we went with this applicant instead. But don't change these other things that you did during the interview process, because these were phenomenal. And if the opportunity presents itself again, we would love to be in communication with you. Does that make sense? Now, if it's somebody you really don't want to ever talk to again because it turns out it was horrible, those are also hard conversations to have. But again, you can still be positive in what happened during the interview process and just leave it at that, right? Unfortunately, we're just moving forward with applicants because you don't have to go into the detail of what you're moving forward with and why, but talk about them because you know a little bit about them from the interview, right? So make it about that. That is an easy way to release them, if you will, and reject them without making it about, well, here's why you did poorly. Does that make sense? Make it this feedback that's actually beneficial to them and not just, well, we're just moving forward to another applicant. We appreciate you. Good luck. Because that's oftentimes how we make it feel. And it's just not personalized. Applicants want it to be more personalized. And that's a good way to make it more personalized. So,
yeah. I think I love let's talk about personalization a lot. And I think that's super great. And yeah, it also takes the sting out of it when you take a human approach to it. And it's not just email, because you can convey that tone a lot better in person than you can over
absolutely.
Yeah.
That's why I prefer the phone call. I would always, I don't know, when I was trained as a recruiter, it was always smile and dial, right? Smile. And in fact, when you're rejecting somebody, purposely look in the mirror and smile as you're talking to them, because it will actually make your tone of voice better too. So something to think about when you call.
Yeah. And when you smile, you feel better and the other person feels better too. Yeah.
You absolutely do. Even when you're rejecting someone, nobody takes rejection well, right? Nobody does. I had somebody jump across the table and punch my manager once after we rejected him. That was fun. So, but I feel like that's the worst, I guess, that could happen.
Stories of a war room. Awesome. So we're a couple minutes over time, so I want to wrap things up, but I want to respect everyone's time who joined us. So thank you so much for joining us today. Stephen, thank you so much for all the information. I learned some things. I hope everyone tuning in learned some things. I think it was great. I think, we all need to be able to focus on how do we make this candidate experience better? How do we make things easier for them? And your employer brand will only be better for it, and you'll get better applicants and you'll be able to hire faster. And isn't that all what we want? We all want that. If you want to learn a little bit more about how to build like a great culture after the fact, after you've hired somebody, how do you keep them engaged? How do you keep them retained? How do you keep them excited? And keep bringing that purpose to things. Check out our gusto.com culture advantage. We created a whole white paper. We broke it down on how like your executives need to get involved, how managers need to get involved, how every single person in the organization needs to get involved in this. But the ROI on this, the return on investment, is incredible if you can really make this.
It really is. And I'm going to tell you that I was looking at this and I'm telling you, this is well worth getting, guys. Well worth getting.
So check it out. Go to that URL. We'll drop it in the comments as well. Thanks again. And Steve, thanks again for joining us and dropping your wisdom.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah, you're welcome. Take care, guys. Happy hiring.